everybody watch while he works that mouse.
Welcome to the York Daily Record and Sunday News editorial board. My name is Scott Fisher, and I am the editorial page editor. And we are here today with Governor Tom Wolf's Chief of Staff, Katie McGinty, and we really appreciate you taking the time to come and talk to us today.
Thank you, Scott.
I'd like to introduce our members of our editorial board. Just go around the room so that the folks at home, they're not going to see them. So if you just kind of just say who you are and what your position is here so that folks can hear your voice. Jeff George.
Hi, Katie. We met George Sepik, Vice President of the Audience.
Great.
Ed?
Ed Main, I'm not on the editorial board, but I am covering this. So.
My name is Sarah Glines. I'm the publisher of the York Daily Record, president of the York Newspaper Company, and on the editorial board.
Terrific.
Jim McClure, editor. And last time you talked about water resources. So
That's true.
Yeah,
Indeed.
So this will be just equally as interesting, I'm sure.
My goodness, was that
we were?
Yes, and I was trying to pitch the initiative where we finally raised some money to do things like restore water and sewer infrastructure, which it's unseen and we don't think about it until it erupts and reminds us that it's there and it's old.
I'm Jared Bean. I'm not on the editorial board, but I'm the vice president of advertising here.
Great, Jared. Nice to see you. Good. Thanks.
And we also have three members of our community here and hopefully we'll get a chance to have them ask some questions.
I hope so.
at the
That's
end.
great.
But thank you for coming. Well, I know that you have an agenda. You wanted to talk to us about Governor Wolf's proposed budget. So basically, I thought we'd let you start with that, and you can talk to us about what you want. We do have questions, and we'll jump in if that's all right.
Oh, it's all right. You're in charge, but I do appreciate the opportunity to just lay out some thoughts at the outset. And I think first, and as a framing comment, this is a time for decided leadership, decided change in Pennsylvania. We're at a crossroads where we have rich opportunities through the great workforce we have, the academic institutions we have, even just the blessing of geography. We sit in the middle of the biggest buying market in the world. And so with that recipe, we should be able to be a leading state, to be cutting edge in some of the industries that are now growing. But we're not. We're at a place where literally our job performance has been 50th out of 50 states, last in the country in terms of job creation, $2 billion plus structural deficit. We've seen our credit rating as a state downgraded 5 times in the last couple of years, 3 times last year, so that we're second to the bottom in the country in our credit rating. That's a recipe that just calls out to say, all right, status quo is not going to work. So in comes a new governor from a pretty good place in Pennsylvania, don't you think? York has grown some terrific leadership, but with a vision that says it's time to give Pennsylvania the shot in the arm that we need, we deserve, and strengthen middle-class families. And we do that in 4 ways. One is to restore all of those dollars that were cut out of public education, knowing that our kids are our most valuable resource, knowing that if we enable our kids to get off to a good start, so not only putting money back into Head Start that had been cut, but doubling our investment in pre-K. Now that still doesn't bring us home. Even with a doubled investment, we go from 1 in 6 children in Pennsylvania having access to high quality pre-K to about 1 in 3. But a critical investment in our future. I know as the 9th to 10 kids and the first in my family to go to 4-year college. That education's the ticket. That's how we realize the promise and potential that we have and have a shot at a good life. So that's number 1 for the governor. Number 2, though, if there were 2 messages in the gubernatorial election, it was restore the schools, but then it was cut my property taxes. And we have had a crushing burden in many of our communities, whether they're urban, rural, suburban, where the tax base has eroded. And the only game in town, you still got to pay the bills. And so it's been on homeowners, and it's been on homeowners, and it's been on homeowners. So this budget proposes the single largest cut in property taxes in Pennsylvania history. Third, coming back to the water issue, infrastructure, workforce development. These are tools we have to compete. We need roads and bridges that work. We need water infrastructure that is sound and able to support families and businesses. So, and that's a virtuous cycle investment, right? When you build infrastructure, you build the foundation for future growth, and immediately you're putting people to work to do that. So it's a double win. That's a foundation for the governor, along with bringing back job training and apprenticeship programs. Now, York is one of those places that's been a significant piece of our proud manufacturing heritage. Pennsylvanians know how to make stuff. I think the country is realizing that it's in our economic and national security imperative to make stuff again and not just be consumers. But we're not going to do that if we keep depleting those job training and apprenticeship programs that enable our workers to get good jobs. So that's a third plank. And then finally, most Pennsylvanians probably don't know this. While we are a very low tax jurisdiction, and nobody ever feels like their taxes are low, rightly so, but from an income tax perspective in particular, we're one of the lowest in the country, maybe second to last. But from a corporate net income point of view, we're on the opposite extreme. So at 9.99%, we're second highest in the country in corporate net income taxes. Now, it's a double whammy bad thing for the state. That high number scares businesses away. Well, we'll go to Ohio. We're not going to that high tax jurisdiction. On the other hand, we don't really get the dollars from that because there's a whole lot of loopholes. So the governor's saying, let's get real, let's give up the ghost on this thing that's not real and hurts our economy. So his proposal would bring corporate taxes down to the second lowest in the country. He'd cut them by 50%. So invest in education, cut property taxes, invest in infrastructure and workforce development, cut business taxes. That, the governor believes, is a recipe for us to say loudly, clearly, Pennsylvania's open for business, we're going to compete, we're going to win, and we're going to give those struggling middle-class families a hand up. That's where we are.
Are there any numbers on the corporate taxes in terms of you cut it down to that level? What do we actually lose in terms of real dollars?
Well, I'll tell you, in terms of the net, if you will, exposure for corporations in taxes under the governor's proposal. So he proposes to cut in half the corporate net income tax. He proposes to eliminate what's called the capital stock and franchise tax. But he also proposes to those loopholes that I was talking about, to close the Delaware loophole. And so to the numbers you're talking about, that nets out. So on the one hand, you're cutting the taxes, on the other, you're closing the loophole. It's still a huge tax cut to businesses in Pennsylvania. So net, in the first year, it's about $250 million overall reduction in corporate taxes. And by the time you get to the full 50% cut of the corporate net income tax, get down to $499, it's a full $700 million net overall real tax cut for businesses. So I think the short answer is that CNI probably brings in a couple of $100 million a year.
So one of the things that we've been focusing on here in New York recently is let's talk about property taxes. That's a big issue in York County. I know it's not in every part of the state, but it is here. And the proposal that the administration's put forward is that the average homeowner would get about $1,000 property tax cut. We're having a hard time figuring out exactly where those numbers come from and where. Could you lay that out for us?
Sure. So some of the numbers are more complex, and some of them are just pretty straightforward arithmetic. And on the property taxes, it's in the latter category. The state as a whole pays about $7.8 billion a year in school property taxes. The governor's plan delivers $3.8 billion a year in school property tax relief. So it's sort of 50%. That's where we come up with. And then if you look on average, how much are people's school property tax bills, they're about $2,000 a year on average. And so 50% of that is about $1,000. So that is just a pretty straightforward arithmetic. When you get into things like looking at the income tax and mostly the sales tax, the picture gets a lot more complex because you're guessing at people's buying behavior. And so, we've run those numbers, we've run those scenarios, we've run them a variety of different ways. And that's how we come out with our number that any homeowner making $100,000 or less is a significant tax winner under the governor's plan, and those making more than $100,000 probably all in would pay more in taxes under his plan.
Individuals, is that what you're talking about, or?
Yeah, couples, so that would be in one household. So if you had two individuals, each earning $100,000, that would be counted as $200,000 of income in that household under the governor's plan.
Ed, you've been focusing a lot on that issue. Do you have any follow-up questions?
In terms of just the, with the House plan that passed, I think, we were looking at some of the different numbers. In York County, York City would get like 15 million from the House plan. From the governor's plan, it's 29 million. That's the biggest difference. But
You hear that, folks? 29 million.
But for every other York County school district would get more under the House plan. I guess as you're entering into these negotiations, how, for the other districts that would get more under the House plan, what's your, view on those, and what's your message to them about considering the best plan?
Well, I guess I want to say a thematic issue or idea on this question first, which is just, I think people are tired of everything being partisan rancor. And one of the things that Tom Wolf is about is the door is open for anybody who has a good idea and anybody who's willing to go beyond the usual silly season and work with people. And maybe as folks know, he has literally invited every single member of the legislature, 253 individuals, leadership, rank and file, Republicans, Democrats. We've mixed it up and have Senate people sitting with House people. I mean, it's never happened. So many members sit around the table and say, we've not had these policy discussions. The governor literally sits at the table with a pen in his hand and takes notes as each individual gets to say what their constituents' biggest concerns are. He did that before the budget, and the two things he heard, education and property taxes, that's the center of the budget. We're on round 2 now, where he's saying, okay, I put my budget out there, what do you think? What did I get right? What did I get wrong? The property tax bill is one that represents some of the fruit, I think, of the governor saying, I'm working with anybody and everybody. The idea that a major piece of legislation like that, only 18 weeks into a new governor's term, has made it through one of the houses of our legislature is a huge deal. And here, in terms of...
That's not his plan, though, is it? I mean,
well, he, so one, a shout out to Stan Saylor, another local leader. The governor was very clear. No, it's not exactly his plan. He thinks we ought to send the maximum amount of dollars to the communities that are paying the highest millage rate. So the governor's plan brings the biggest relief to those paying the biggest rate. Stan Saylor's plan distributes the dollars differently in a way that the governor doesn't think will stimulate the economy and help homeowners as much as his plan. On the other hand, the governor put his shoulder to the wheel working with Stan Saylor because it was a big lift on an important bill, and so important to let the conversation build. Don't just say no because it's not your plan exactly from the beginning. So look, it was Republican and Democratic leaders who made that plan happen, but the governor was very pleased to work with those leaders and help encourage some 33 Democrats who wound up voting for that Republican plan, enabling it to pass. It would not have passed, actually, unless the Democrats came together with the Republicans, and the governor was some of the glue in that conversation.
So his plan does a lot for cities like York. I mean, can you talk a little bit about that? What is his vision there? It's like, because, and I think the difference between the Saylor plan and the Wolf plan is that Saylor would help suburbanites more, it's just, and rural folks more than it would help cities. Why does the governor feel like so much help needs to be pumped?
Well, actually, I think the governor's plan, on balance, well, I shouldn't say a broad sweep, but the governor's plan is a huge shot in the arm to many, many rural communities. It's not urban or rural that makes any of the difference in the governor's plan. It's literally the communities that have had, that have faced the most skyrocketing millage rates. And those hollowed out communities where they've seen businesses flee and many families leave, those down on their luck communities are scattered across the Commonwealth. Many of them are in our more rural communities. Many of them are in our urban communities as well. But the big point for the governor is to bring the biggest relief to those who have been paying the highest tax rate. Stan Saylor's proposal delivers the relief differently and does reach more affluent communities more significantly than the governor's does, and that's probably the most significant difference between the two. That's a significant difference between the two of them. The other thing that the governor does is address the structural deficit that we have, the $2 billion plus in budget deficit that this Commonwealth is facing, and that we have to pay the bill. So his plan does that as well, and that's another difference between the two plans and two approaches.
But did he go into this specifically thinking I need to help cities like York?
He went into it thinking that I have to help struggling communities that are struggling because they've seen their tax base eroded. On the other hand, they're established communities for a reason. Whether they're urban or rural, they're usually there because why? The river's next is proximate. There's infrastructure. There's an academic institution of some kind. There's some reason why that community was located there before, and those are bones that we should build on and reinvest in and strengthen. That's the common theme. And the other thing is related to this. We've seen the legislature do backflips over the years to try to address this question. And you might be familiar with special tax treatment zones, KOZs, and then KOIZs, and then CRIZs, and then NIZs, NIZs, and CRIZs. And it's all a backflip to say that our base tax structure is backwards and is hurting the economic competitiveness of our longer established communities. Let's take a whack at that systemically instead of this alphabet soup of programs, and let everybody compete on the basis of their location and their infrastructure and all of the natural assets they have to attract families and businesses back.
Some people have criticized the plan, saying, okay, so we reduce school taxes, it just allows the cities to raise their millage rates. And
yeah.
What's the response to that?
Governor is very strong on that. And look, this is something that not everybody's going to favor, but he wants these dollars to be in the classroom, improving the education of kids. He also has talked about, as an accountability measure, he'd like to see a longer school day in some districts. He'd like to see districts potentially offering summer education experience for kids. One thing he is not for is the building of new auditoriums or whole fancy new school buildings. This is not about Taj Mahals of school building, and the governor's really pretty firm about that. So to your point about putting a lid on those school property taxes going right back up, there's a new prohibition in the language that we've introduced to the legislature. And it literally prohibits any school district that has reserves of 4% or greater. They are prohibited under the governor's legislation from raising school property taxes. That's 412 out of 500 school districts in Pennsylvania would be captured by that prohibition.
How about the municipal taxes, though? Some people say, well, the big school tax cut would give cover to mayors and so forth to raise their taxes because, the residents aren't paying so much in school taxes.
Well, in most communities, it is that school property tax that's 2/3 of the tax bill. So this really is the lion's share of it. And beyond that, I think local communities have ways of letting their local mayors know if they're pleased or not pleased about what otherwise unfolds. But in terms of the biggest piece of that school property tax bill, this is the biggest single cut in those taxes, and two, the toughest prohibitions on raising those taxes that we've ever had in the state.
Let's talk a little bit about the sales tax proposal.
Sure.
a lot of the sort of removal of a bunch of the exemptions has become somewhat controversial, the nursing home situation, college meal plans and so forth. Where are you on that? Is there any give in terms of negotiations with the lawmakers on that?
You know, absolutely. Here's what the governor did. Look, I've itemized all the things the governor thinks is important to help middle-class families and to grow the economy. The education, the property tax cut, the workforce and infrastructure investments, and business tax cuts. There's no free lunch. You've got to pay for that, to say nothing of the deficits the governor inherited. So you got to pay for it. What the governor did is say, I want to be bipartisan in addressing that tough question. Nobody likes to pay the bill. So he adopted two major Republican pieces of legislation. They went by the numbers House and Senate Bill 76. And those bills paid for property tax reduction by increasing the personal income tax and increasing the sales tax higher than the governor proposed. So they increased those taxes more than the governor proposed. But embedded in House and Senate Bill 76 was the broadening of the base on the sales tax. I will tell you, as we thought of the prospect of how's the public going to respond to this, because everybody's favorite thing that you don't want taxed is in there, we decided... And there you go. Just to name one. We just decided starting on that bipartisan note was more important. And that was common ground where Republican lawmakers had already signed themselves up for that, so the governor wanted to respect that. Now, as I said, the governor's proposal is less than what was in House and Senate Bill 76, and as you raise the income tax from 3.07 to 3.7, as the governor's plan would do, and I think Stan Saylor's number is the same as that now, there's no two ways of looking at it other than that's a real increase. On the other hand, even at 3.7, we would be the third lowest income tax jurisdiction in the country. So we'd still have the third lowest income taxes. On the broadening of the base, it's really about one, common ground, two, numbers are numbers. If there's another way to pay the bill and to work with the sales tax so that you're not expanding that base as was in House and Senate Bill 76, governor's all ears.
I mean, so that'd be like would that be, I mean, is that a higher rate for the state? I mean, that's what
Stan Saylor's bill does adopt a higher rate.
Mm-hmm.
The governor proposed 6.7%, and Stan's bill is 7%.
So I mean, is that an area, because there's I see three main differences with the two plans. One is how money is distributed, which
Yes.
we talked about.
Uh-huh.
Two is, they say they don't bring any new revenue in. The governor's plan would bring in new revenue.
Yes.
And then the sales tax thing. I mean, is the sales tax the area where there's room to...
I think there's room probably on all of those three things to negotiate. You know, the governor wants to make sure at the end of the day we're helping communities grow. That's what it's about. And if that doesn't mean that his plan is absolutely perfect in that regard, there's not room for other people's ideas. So that's the distribution side. The sales tax side, again, his purpose was only to do something that was bipartisan and to have a no gimmicks budget. No gimmicks, he won't tolerate it. We're going to pay the bill, we're going to be honest. And so if there's a different way to pay the bill rather than expanding the base on the sales tax, he'll be all ears.
In terms of expanding revenue,
Yeah.
wondering how, because that seems to be a big focus. He wants to put more money in schools. In New York City schools, apparently they just have passed a budget that's assuming that everything that's in the governor's proposal would come their way, which probably seems the wrong way to me. But
Well, historically, it's never, ever been the case that the legislature has given less to schools than the governor has proposed. So York would be on good historical grounds to expect the dollars that the governor has proposed, and the legislature would be on bad historical grounds if they failed to deliver those resources.
So
And another factoid along those lines, by the way, as I mentioned, the governor has also proposed to significantly increase pre-K funding so that we can have more kids going to pre-K. The doubling of those resources that he's proposed would allow another 14,000 daycare, pre-K centers to have the benefit of support from the state. As we sit here today, have gotten applications for 25,000 pre-K facilities that want to participate and are hoping that those resources will be delivered. Huge demand out there.
This is a little bit off budget topic, but the New York City School District, as I'm sure you know, is in the recovery process. We had a recovery officer, he resigned and so forth. We have a new one who yesterday kind of put out a little bit of inkling of what the plan is. They sort of come up with some short-term 90-day goals, but basically short-term goals. Let's do this and let's meet those goals and let's move on and so forth. And there's a hope that that this will become a model for fixing struggling school districts. Do you have any insight into that plan, or anything that you can tell us that's what his thinking is with it?
Well, Dr. Saylor, so her thinking, what I think, stepping back, 3 priorities. One is to restore fiscal soundness to the school district. Second, to be in a trajectory where performance can significantly be improved. Third, though, and I think to your point of what's that going to look like, no surprises to the community, that this would be an open and transparent process, and I think Mayor Bracy really underscored that yesterday in some of her comments as well, of including the community. One of the things that I think is hopeful and encouraging here is our Secretary of Education, Pedro Rivera, has been through this process with the Lancaster schools when he was superintendent there. And I think that some of the approaches forward, are back to the future, right? It's some of the simple, can we get kids in smaller class rooms, smaller class sizes? Can we make sure that they've got up-to-date textbooks? Can we invest in some professional development for teachers? I don't know what all of the contours and dimensions of this are going to be, but I think it'll be a plan that the community can feel proud of, and will be very much a part of envisioning and executing.
One part of it that struck me is that they're going to bring in an outside consultant to study the situation there. It seems to me that we kind of have a lot of data already on what the issue is, what's wrong and what's not. Is that really necessary to spend 100 and whatever it is to study the situation that's already been studied to death?
Well, listen, as a mom with kids, 3 of whom until recently have been in the public schools themselves, I have my instincts. I'd like to see a whole lot less of standardized testing, for example. My 9th grader in public high school is going to sit through this year a fully 8 weeks of standardized tests. Talk about drain the spirit and energy out of a classroom. On the other hand, that's my instinct as a mom. I'm not an expert, and I wouldn't second guess the experts. If Dr. Saylor and Pedro Rivera think that there's some ideas that we can gather, I'm just going to be excited to see what those ideas are.
Let's talk about, if you don't mind, we can talk about the gas extraction tax issue.
Thanks. Yep.
Ed, you're kind of an expert on this issue. Why don't you?
Sure. Just in terms of there's the 5% rate, and then there's the taxing the volume, and then the independent fiscal office says the governor's proposal would do some things that other states don't do, and specifically setting that floor for tax purposes, or $2.97. And that would, with lower gas prices, the industry says, and the Chamber of Commerce business have said that increases the effective tax rate. I guess just when you're talking about the extraction tax, I mean, what estimates do you have for how that would raise Pennsylvania's effective tax rate? And the concern is that it wouldn't stay competitive. I guess what's your response to those concerns there? By doing those things, it's no longer competitive.
Yeah, so to set the context there, I mean, first of all, Pennsylvania is blessed with what appears to be the most abundant and prolific gas resource maybe in the entire country. The industry leaders have been heard recently talking to the Wall Street analysts saying that Pennsylvania has monster wells, that we have the biggest producing wells Production in Pennsylvania wells has gone up 400% in just the last couple of years. We went from nowhere to literally second in the country behind only Texas. And Texas has been at it for 60 years. So it's a hugely prolific resource. One other metric, last year the value of gas produced in Pennsylvania was $11 billion. $11 billion of gas produced here. Just 4 years ago, it was $4 billion. So the rate of growth is enormous. Taxes. Having this most prolific resource, we're the only state in the country, the only one that does not impose a tax for the severance of that gas. The only one. So we've got the best resource, and we don't charge anything for it to be severed. The industry will push back and say, oh, well, we pay all this slew of other taxes, except for when you look at the records, because of all these loopholes, the entire industry has paid a grand total of $193 million in taxes over 5 years, and that includes the net income tax, the sales and use tax, the personal income tax. Not much for ExxonMobil to be paying when they're realizing $11 billion of value, $193 million, and that's only in 1 year. So over 5 years, it'd be $55 billion of value, $193 million in taxes. The governor's Marcellus Shale severance tax saying it's only fair to Pennsylvanians that everybody pay their fair share, and on this rich resource, a tax should be paid. We structured the tax almost exactly on the model of West Virginia so that we would be competitive with neighboring states. The real value of it is less than what Governor Kasich has proposed in Ohio. He's proposed a 6.6% severance tax. We think all in the governor's tax, the real value of it would be about a 5.7% severance tax. Puts us right in the middle of the pack, and again is only fair that Pennsylvania, like any other state, impose a severance tax on Pennsylvanians. Here's the thing too. The governor thinks that it is absolutely in the industry's interest that they step up and be seen by their neighbors in Pennsylvania to be part of this community and to be making an investment in our Commonwealth. That's what good corporate citizens do, and that enhances the future of that industry in our Commonwealth. You've seen a lot of communities concerned about pipeline infrastructure coming through. Well, when they're getting nothing by way of an upside from the gas production, and all they see is then infrastructure coming through their community to move the gas to Texas or somewhere else, that's a community that's going to oppose the industry. If, on the other hand, they're partnered with the industry and the industry is helping to support public education or other key investments in a community, that's a partnership, and that's different. So that's at the heart of the governor's proposal. His proposal is right in the middle of the pack. It would be fair for the industry and fair for Pennsylvanians.
So just to clarify, it is slightly higher than West Virginia's then, correct?
Yeah, with West Virginia's is, it's probably, theirs is probably about 5.5% because the formula is the same. It's an ad valorem tax, 5% of value, and then 4.7% per what they call MCF, so that's volume. And ours is the same there. The difference is we put in a price floor.
Right.
But the price floor, we took from the legislation that was passed 2 years ago on infrastructure in Pennsylvania, Act 89, instituted a price floor with respect to the price of gasoline, so that there could be some predictability and certainty with respect to the flow of revenues. So that probably adds a little bit to the effective value of our tax, and that's the one key difference between ours and West Virginia.
Okay. So let's move on to pensions. So I understand that Governor Wolf and the administration is not real fond of the pension reform proposal that's been passed. I hear from readers who say, well, if you're in a hole, stop digging. So that's kind of what this is trying to do. So why shouldn't we stop digging?
Well, unfortunately, what the Senate has proposed would make the hole vastly bigger. The governor's proposal, the governor has a pension reform proposal that's central to his budget. And that proposal goes to the heart of the problem. The heart of the problem is that for the better part of 17 years, Republicans and Democrats, this has been bipartisan, have failed to pay the pension bill. And so as we sit here today, $55 billion in unfunded liability has accumulated. The Senate bill does not a thing about that, doesn't address it at all, and in fact, because of provisions that, one, are unfair and two, are probably unconstitutional, would greatly exacerbate that unfunded liability. People have heard of, well, businesses have moved to 401k plans, why don't we do that? The insight there is a good one. We should have risk sharing, right? So right now, the defined benefit plan, all the risk is on the employer, not on the employee. If you go to a 401k plan, all the risk is on the employee and the employer has no risk. The problem with just moving to a 401k plan in our situation where you have $55 billion of unfunded liability, what that means is you take all the new earners, all the new employees, you take them out of the plan and you put them in a separate plan, and then there's only one person left to pay that $55 billion of unfunded liability, and that's the taxpayer. The estimates, independent fiscal estimates of what that would do is almost would double the unfunded liability to the taxpayer. Would add $44 billion of additional bills because the people who would be paying the bill, namely the new employees who are paying 7.25% out of their paycheck, they'd be gone. And so it'd just be the taxpayer to pay it. A couple of states did that. Alaska, I think West Virginia, Montana, maybe 3 or 4 states, and they are all moving back and have reopened their defined benefit plan because they were just, their taxpayers were being crushed with this new burden. The governor's plan goes to the heart of it. Does a couple of things. One, says no more monkey business in terms of not paying the bill. We're going to have the discipline here to pay our bills. So he puts the pension in a restricted payment account, which by law means before we pay for any other goodies or set ourselves up to have more goodies, we're paying these bills. Second, we've looked very carefully at what our pension fund, how it's managed. And the bottom line is Wall Street is having a field day in managing our pension fund. Last year, the taxpayers paid Wall Street more than $720 million to manage our fund and to invest our fund. We have about $72 billion under management, 100 basis points, $720 million. It's so out of the market. And so the governor's plan would order that we take that to market and vastly cut those expenses. Third thing, the governor would refinance $3 billion of the unfunded liability, put it together, instead of increasing the burden to taxpayers, as these other plans would do, it cuts that burden by $10 billion. And in 1 year, by 16-17, that fiscal year, we'd go from a hugely problematic pension plan to one that's actuarially sound, where we're actually paying the bill, where we're getting this under control. That's the governor's plan. That's what relieves the burden to the taxpayers.
Do you understand that there's frustration out there with a lot of regular folks?
Sure.
These pensions
Sure.
are just too generous. Well, I don't get this. I'm struggling with my 401k. It goes up, it goes down. I don't know where I'm going to end up. And I don't really care if some current employees lose benefits. I don't care if it's unconstitutional. I just don't want to pay this much.
Well, but what the governor would say is that's fine. But what you should care about is don't let anybody sell you a bill of goods and put something in place that's going to double your tax burden, because that's what these plans, they don't advertise it, but that's what it does. That's what it does. The second thing is, though, on this idea of we've got to reduce the overall benefits that are proposed, there was a law passed in 2010 called Act 120. And that law was driven by a realization that, my goodness, we've got a huge bill to pay here, and back in 2001, the benefit package was made much more rich and lucrative. And so we have to cut that back. So that radically changes the situation for any employee hired after 2010, which is 20% of the workforce now. If employers are out there listening to this, most employers would be looking at probably about 5-6% of payroll would be what they'd pay into a retirement benefit plan, whether it's 401k or whatever it is. After these changes, the Commonwealth will actually only be paying 3% of payroll. So the benefits have been dramatically squeezed down. Now, and it brings up another one of our issues with respect to what passed in the Senate. So in 2001, when our pension plan was on very solid footing, it was 135% funded in 2001. Legislatures said, that looks like a lot of money there. Maybe we could sweeten the pot for ourselves. And so the multiplier was increased from 2% to 2.5%. The retirement age was reduced from 65 to 60. And the vesting period, because the governor was like, wait a minute, even if I'm reelected, I'm only going to be here 8 years. The vesting period's 10 years. Well, that's no good. So the vesting period was cut to 5 years. Well, under the Senate plan that just passed, for the average Joe employee, if they want to keep that level, that rich package of 2001 benefits, they have to shell out more money for it, or else those benefits are taken away. Not for the legislature.
We know that.
It's just fine for them.
So we're getting the hook in 5 minutes,
Oh.
so I wanted to see if we had questions from our other members of the board or from our readers who joined us today.
Please.
Could I just comment on the tax? The last I looked, we were the second oldest state in the union. I don't know if that's still the case or not, but the fact is nursing homes and assisted living homes are very important to Pennsylvanians. And speaking as someone who, with his brother and sister, helped our mother in her final years while she was in assisted living until she went into a nursing home and Medicaid took over, that when the Secretary of Budget said we took 46 new categories and we're going to tax them and we've only left the bare essentials like medicines, I would like to submit that nursing homes and assisted living homes, when you can't meet your 7 daily tasks of life and you have to have help and you can't get it from your children, are very critical. And if you're going to exempt medicines, prescription drugs from sales tax, I believe that a large majority, a great number of Pennsylvanians would like to see you take care of nursing homes and assisted living homes in the same way. You indicated there's some flexibility in the budget and how you look at it. I hope you'll take back to the governor that message. There's a big part of the population out here that will be affected. And, I'm sorry, I'll be very brief.
You're taking the whole 5 minutes here. I'm sorry.
One last point. The family that makes $100,000,
Yes.
if they have a mother or father in a nursing home or assisted living home, and that mother or father is near indigent, has no money, as my mother and father didn't, and they have one child in college, they will pay more under the new program because of the increased tax on the nursing home and the educational taxes on the college. Then they, even with property tax relief, their net will be more.
Well, when we say families making $100,000 or less, homeowners making $100,000 or less, we take into account those kinds of, that's an all-in number, including the sales tax proposal. So we have run those kinds of scenarios. That's where I say it's not an exact science because you have to make some assumptions, but in those numbers are families who certainly meet that kind of characteristic you're talking about. And I just want to say I understand and really value and appreciate what you and your siblings did. And my own parents, we were blessed to have them to 94 and 92 when I lost my mom and dad 2 years ago, and their last couple of years also in assisted living. It takes families coming together for sure. But your bigger point, on all of those details, the governor's more than flexible. Whatever makes sense in terms of putting the package together, but importantly, making sure no more monkey business on the numbers. We've got to pay the bill and be real and honest about the real bill that needs to be paid.
Now, your background is mostly environmental, which is great for Pennsylvania because we need to protect the environment in Pennsylvania. In the preface to my question, I can't be more pleased with the governor's appointment of some of the cabinet members. I mean, you can't do better than Leslie Richards for transportation, Cindy Dunn. You just don't get better than that for DCNR. Mr. Quigley, DEP, really needs help. So now I'm ready for my question. Okay, and I'll just read it. Can you comment on the appointment of Andrew Place, Corporate Director for Energy and Environmental Policy at EQT Corporation, to the Public Utility Commission? He was just appointed this week. The PUC is pretty much behind the scenes. The public sees the cabinet, but we recognize what the secretaries do. But the PUC is kind of out of sight, out of mind until things go wrong. This particular appointment is curious to me. I don't have an opinion until you respond.
Thank you. And we nominate, but Andrew Place is very, very well qualified to serve on the Public Utility Commission, so that we hope the Senate will act quickly on his nomination. But the Public Utility Commission is critical. It's critical in making sure that we've got a utility commission that's sticking up for consumers in Pennsylvania. The Utility Commission approves the rates that water companies are able to charge you, the rates that electricity companies are able to charge you. So one is we need consumer advocates there on the Public Utility Commission. However, we also need commissioners who have a vision for the future and understand that Pennsylvania can be a leader in cutting-edge energy technologies. When Governor Rendell was in office, we went from nowhere to #1 in the country in the manufacture of wind energy equipment. We were #2 in the country in solar energy equipment. We were leading the country in innovation around energy efficiency, passed a law, Act 129, where consumers save $300 million a year in electricity bills because we've become more efficient. A lot of that was left to atrophy over the last couple of years. And the governor wants to get that energy and environment balance back, that focus on technology, that focus on innovation, saving consumers money, even as we're leading in these industries that are growing in the country and in the world. That's what Andrew Place brings, a perfect combination of energy expertise and environmental expertise. He'll stand up for the consumer and put us back in a place, hopefully, where we're competing and winning in these cutting-edge, clean energy technology industries.
Okay, just quickly, Stan Saylor, by coincidence, is going to be sitting in that seat
Oh, great.
at 4 o'clock this
Hi,
afternoon.
Stan.
Any parting words for him?
We appreciate his leadership in having taken a key piece of legislation that will right-size our tax structure in Pennsylvania. You don't have the details all exactly right yet, Stan, but we're looking forward to working with you. Now, Stan did a great job, and the governor was really pleased to work with him.
Great. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you very, very